dance for adoption. Go on. Spin, shake, do whatever your kind does. Maybe someone here will feel sorry enough to take you home.
Faith Turner did not move.
No.
And breathed.
Then what good are you?
300 guests laughed. Not one looked away. Faith whispered.
My mother taught me ballet.
Garrett's face crumpled with disgust.
Ballet? A black orphan from a Harlem shelter doing ballet? Now that is the funniest thing I have heard all year.
But before this night was over, his own ballet master would kneel before this girl, and Garrett Hollowell would never laugh again. Man, laughing at someone's dream like that is cruel. Let's get into it. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel dripped with money. Crystal chandeliers threw light across 300 powdered faces. Gold columns framed a stage draped in white silk. Silver trays floated between tables carrying champagne that cost more per glass than Faith Turner had eaten in a week. This was a child's dream. Garrett Hollowell's annual charity gala. $50,000 per table. Manhattan's richest families gathered in black tie, pretending for one evening that orphans mattered. The program was elegant in its cruelty. 12 children from St. Amelia's orphanage in Harlem had been scrubbed clean and dressed in new clothes that would be collected at the door when the night ended. Each child wore a cardboard sign around their neck. Name, age, one hobby. Like items at a silent auction nobody intended to bid on. Faith Turner's sign read, Faith, 17, likes reading. The word ballet had been there first. Brenda Hollins, the orphanage director, scratched it out with a ballpoint pen. Ballet would give the wrong impression. Low expectations meant fewer disappointments. Faith stood last in line. 17. Tall, thin, dark skin catching chandelier light that nobody in the room thought was meant for her. Gray second-hand dress loose at the shoulders. Hair pulled into a tight bun, not because the gala required it, but because Lorraine Turner had always worn hers that way. Lorraine, Faith's mother, dead 9 years. In her left hand, Faith carried a faded canvas bag. Inside was a pair of block heritage point shoes, satin gone gray, toe box cracked, ribbons fraying. Inside the left shoe, in fading black ink, 8 words. Dance with your spine, not your feet. L.T. Lorraine Turner had been a dancer. Not the kind whose name appeared at Lincoln Center. The kind who taught neighborhood children for $8 an hour above a laundromat on 125th Street. The kind whose body could silence any stage in the world but never got the chance. She tried once. At 19, Lorraine auditioned for a prestigious academy in London. She danced flawlessly. The academy's young director watched without blinking. He knew what he was seeing. The word was not gifted. The word was rare. But the funding board looked at Lorraine's skin and said she was not the right image. The young director said nothing. He let her walk out. Lorraine flew home to Harlem and never auditioned again. She taught Faith instead. Every day from age 4 to age 8. 5 positions. Port-de-bras, tendu, développé, grand allegro. Not from a textbook, from her own body. Every correction, every technique she had invented alone, while washing machines rumbled below. Then the coughing started. Lung cancer. Lorraine died holding Faith's hand in an apartment that smelled like medicine and old wood. 6 students and a landlord came to the funeral. The landlord wanted the keys. Faith went to St. Amelia's. She told no one she could dance. Every night after lights out, she practiced barefoot on the cold dormitory floor with her mother's shoes pressed against her chest. No mirror, no bar, no music, just memory, repeating what a dead woman's hands had pressed into her muscles. 9 years, alone, silent. Tonight, she stood in the plaza, holding that same canvas bag. Not one person looked at her twice. Garrett Hollowell owned this evening completely. 14 high-rises across Manhattan, a foundation that generated $18 million in tax deductions yearly. Every year, he selected one photogenic orphan on stage, signed papers before cameras, and smiled until the flashbulbs stopped. Each child was quietly returned to St. Amelia's within 4 months, once the headlines moved on. Tonight, he had already chosen. A 6-year-old blonde girl from the front of the line. Blue eyes, easy smile. Faith was not on his list. Backstage, Victor Ellsworth stretched his ankles in silence before a single mirror bulb. 63 years old, ballet master. 40 years across the Royal Academy of Dance, Bolshoi guest residencies, private stages of kings. Garrett paid him $150,000 for 30 minutes of The Dying Swan tonight. Victor cared nothing for galas or champagne. He cared about one thing: technique so precise it stopped time. In 40 years, he had seen perhaps 3 dancers who made his breath catch. Only 3. He did not yet know that the 4th stood 60 feet away, clutching a canvas bag that held shoes he had last seen 30 years ago, on the feet of a 19-year-old girl whose name he still could not say without his voice breaking. Garrett Hollowell had a gift for making cruelty look generous. He stepped onto the stage with his arms open wide, microphone clipped to his lapel, smile rehearsed to perfection. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the heart of tonight's program. His voice rolled warm across the ballroom. Behind me stand 12 beautiful children who are waiting, just waiting, for someone in this room to change their lives. He paused. Let the silence do its work. 300 faces softened on cue. Now, I thought we would do something special this year. Garrett clasped his hands together. Instead of simply introducing these children, I want to give them a chance to shine, to show you, in their own way, who they really are. He turned to the line of orphans. His eyes moved slowly from left to right, scanning each child the way a man scans a restaurant menu when nothing looks appetizing. He passed the 6-year-old blonde girl with a warm nod. He passed a 10-year-old boy with a quick wink. Then his gaze reached the end of the line and stopped. Faith Turner. Standing apart from the others, canvas bag pressed against her ribs, head down. The only child who had not smiled once since arriving. Garrett's smile sharpened. He had not planned this. But something about the 17-year-old black girl standing stiff and silent at the end of his stage triggered an instinct in him. The same instinct that made him demolish a building before the tenants finished packing. You, he pointed his finger directly at Faith. Come here. Faith did not move for 3 seconds. Then she walked forward, each step soundless on the marble. Garrett put a hand on her shoulder. His rings pressed cold against her collarbone through the thin gray dress. Tell us your name, sweetheart. Faith Turner. Faith. He repeated it slowly, turning the name over for the audience like a curiosity. And Faith, what do you do? What is your special talent? The ballroom waited. Faith's throat moved once. Then she said it. I dance ballet. Garrett blinked. For 1/2 second his mask slipped, and what was underneath, raw, unfiltered contempt, flashed across his face, before the smile came back twice as wide. Ballet! He turned to the audience. Did everyone hear that? This 17-year-old girl from a Harlem shelter just told us she dances ballet. A ripple of laughter moved across the room, soft at first, testing. Garrett fed it. Sweetheart, ballet is not something you pick up between bunk beds. It requires training. It requires academies. It requires a certain... He waved his hand vaguely in Faith's direction. Foundation. The word hung in the air. Everyone heard what it meant. Nobody said it out loud. Constance Davenport, seated at the front table in a gown that cost more than St. Amelia's monthly budget, leaned toward her husband and whispered loud enough for the next 3 tables to hear. A black girl doing ballet. At 17, from a shelter. Someone should tell her that ship sailed a long time ago. Laughter spread. Harder now, less polite. A man at table 9 adjusted his Rolex and said to no one in particular, 17 and still not adopted. There is usually a reason for that. More laughter. Phones rose. The red recording lights blinked like small predatory eyes across the dim ballroom. Garrett was enjoying himself. He leaned into the microphone. Well, Faith, since you say you can dance, why not give us a little performance right here? Dance for adoption. Show these fine people one good reason someone should take you home. He stepped back and swept his arm toward the empty stage like a ringmaster presenting an animal act. Faith did not move. She stood where Garrett had placed her, under a spotlight that turned her gray dress white-hot, and she held the canvas bag, and she breathed. Penelope Hollowell, Garrett's wife, sat at the head table. She looked down at her champagne. She did not speak. She did not object. Her silence was its own kind of cruelty, the kind that wears pearls and calls itself discretion. Brenda Hollins watched from the far edge of the ballroom, half hidden behind a column. Her hands were shaking. She was the director of St. Amelia's. She was supposed to protect these children. But Garrett Hollowell donated $300,000 to the orphanage every year. That money kept the lights on, the food coming, the beds warm. Brenda opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she looked at the floor. The 11 other children from St. Amelia's sat in the back row. The youngest was 6. She held the hand of the boy next to her and squeezed it so hard her knuckles turned pale. None of them moved. They knew the rule that no adult had ever spoken aloud, but every orphan understood by instinct. If you make trouble, nobody comes back for you. Faith stood alone on a stage built for spectacle, surrounded by 300 people who had paid $50,000 each to feel generous, and not one of them could see her. Garrett was not finished. He tilted his head, studying Faith the way someone studies an insect on a windowsill. Nothing? No dance? No grand ballet? He shrugged and turned to the audience. I suppose that is the difference between dreaming and doing. Plenty of people dream. Very few have the breeding to deliver. Breeding. He said it without flinching. 300 people heard it. Nobody gasped. Then Garrett added the last line, the one that would cost him everything he owned, every partnership he had built, every handshake deal he had sealed over 30 years of Manhattan real estate, though he did not know it yet. He looked at Faith and said, Sweetheart, if your mother had anything real to give you, you would not be standing on my stage, wearing a borrowed dress, hoping a stranger feels sorry enough to sign a piece of paper. The ballroom erupted. Laughter bounced off the chandeliers and came back louder. Garrett grinned and raised his champagne glass. Faith's hand tightened around the canvas bag until the outline of the point shoes pressed through the fabric. Her eyes were dry. Not because she was not hurt, because she had heard this before. Different words, same meaning, for 9 years straight. Crying had never changed anything. She looked past Garrett, past the cameras, past the chandeliers and the champagne and the 300 faces that would forget her name by morning. And she whispered a sentence that no microphone caught, but that lived inside her chest like a second heartbeat. I hear you, Mama. Spine, not feet. Nobody in that ballroom knew what was coming. In the dressing room backstage, Victor Ellsworth had stopped stretching. He had heard the laughter through the walls. He had heard the name Ballet. And now he was standing at the doorway, looking down the corridor toward the stage, listening to something the rest of the room had already dismissed. He was listening to silence. The silence of a girl who had just been torn apart in public and had not broken. In 40 years of ballet, Victor Ellsworth had learned one truth that no academy could teach. The dancers who shattered under pressure were everywhere. The ones who went quiet, perfectly, dangerously quiet, were the ones who could change the world. He stepped into the corridor, and he began to walk toward the stage. Yo, this part makes my blood boil every single time. A grown man worth billions, standing on a stage telling a kid she is nothing, in front of cameras, and nobody said a word. Nobody. That is not charity. That is cruelty wearing a bow tie. Faith walked off that stage the way a person walks out of a burning building. Steady, deliberate, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. She did not go back to the line of orphans. She turned left into the backstage corridor where the light was dimmer. The marble gave way to old hardwood, and the laughter faded into a muffled roar heard through walls. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, canvas bag in her lap. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage held so tightly it had nowhere to go except her fingers. She opened the bag, took out the point shoes, unlaced her flats, slid her feet into Lorraine's shoes. The satin was rough, the toe box pressed hard and familiar. She tied the ribbons twice around each ankle, not tucked behind the bone where it would not press a nerve. She stood. Releve. The tip of the point shoe touched hardwood, a small, clean sound like a single key struck on a piano. Faith closed her eyes and began to move. Tendu front, tendu side, dégagé, rond de jambe, slow, controlled. Each movement pulled not from thought but from somewhere deeper. 9 years of repetition in the dark, muscle remembering what the mind tried to forget. She did not know anyone was watching. Victor Ellsworth stood at the far end of the corridor. He had come to investigate the silence after the laughter. What he found was sound. The faint rhythmic tap of point shoes on wood that told him, before he even saw the dancer, that whoever was moving knew exactly what they were doing. He stepped closer, kept to the shadows. Faith transitioned into développé à la seconde. Her working leg unfolded from the knee, extending outward past 90 degrees, past 100, past 120. She held it there, no tremor, no grip in her jaw, as though gravity had agreed to wait. Victor stopped breathing. He had trained dancers at the Royal Academy who could not hold développé above 100 degrees without shaking. This girl held 120 like resting position. But that was not what made his hands go cold. It was her wrists. At the end of each port de bras, they turned slightly inward. The pinky finger curled just enough to soften the line into something organic. When she shifted weight between positions, the transfer happened half a beat earlier than standard technique. Not a mistake, a system. Victor had seen this system once before, 30 years ago. A 19-year-old girl walked into his London audition studio with no training record and no matching shoes. She danced for 4 minutes and did something Victor had never encountered. She moved as though she had reinvented ballet from scratch, arrived at the same conclusions as 3 centuries of tradition, then added something entirely her own. He had asked, "Who taught you this?" She answered, "Nobody. I created it. It is how my body understands music." Her name was Lorraine Turner. Now Victor stood in a Plaza Hotel corridor, watching that same system alive inside a 17-year-old girl. Every wrist turn, every weight shift, every curl of the smallest finger. Not similar, identical. He whispered the name before he could stop himself. Lorraine? Faith froze, turned, saw a tall, older man in the shadows with an expression she could not read, somewhere between shock and grief. She tensed. Adults in dark hallways had never meant anything good. "Where did you get those shoes?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. Faith pulled back half a step. "They were my mother's." "Your mother's name?" "Lorraine Turner." Victor closed his eyes. 30 years collapsed into 5 syllables. When he opened them, he looked at Faith the way no one had looked at her in 9 years. Not with pity, not with charity, but with recognition. And behind that recognition, something heavier. Guilt. He did not tell her he had known Lorraine. That truth was too heavy for a corridor. "How long have you been training?" "Since I was 4. My mother taught me until she could not anymore. And after that, I taught myself, every night. Victor said nothing for a long time. Then, not to Faith, but to himself, in a voice that barely stirred the air. 9 years, self-trained, and she moves like that. He looked toward the ballroom where laughter still echoed. Then back at Faith Turner, standing in worn point shoes on bare hardwood. Something shifted behind his eyes. A decision. The kind that rearranges the rest of a life. What was Victor thinking? And what was he about to do? Victor Ellsworth walked back to his dressing room and closed the door. He stood in front of the mirror for 10 seconds without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called his stage assistant. "Change the program. I am not performing the Dying Swan solo tonight." The assistant's voice cracked. "Mr. Ellsworth, the program is printed. Mr. Hollowell personally approved." "Tell Hollowell his program just changed." Victor opened his wardrobe and pulled out a second pair of point shoes, new, unworn, size 6. He always carried spare shoes in 3 sizes. Preparation was not a habit for Victor. It was a religion. "And bring me a chair. I need to conduct an evaluation on stage." An evaluation? Of whom? The girl he just humiliated. Silence on the line. Then, "Sir, Mr. Hollowell will not allow." "Mr. Hollowell can watch. Or Mr. Hollowell can leave. I do not particularly care which." Victor hung up. He looked at himself in the mirror one more time. 63 years old, 40 years of career, thousands of dancers trained, hundreds rejected, 3 remembered. He had built his reputation on never bending, never compromising, never letting sentiment interfere with judgment. But 30 years ago, he had bent. He had let a funding board overrule his eyes. He had watched Lorraine Turner walk out of his studio, and he had said nothing. That silence had followed him across 3 decades, across oceans, across every stage he had ever stood on. It sat in the back of every standing ovation like a chair that would not stop creaking. Tonight, that chair was going to break. He walked out of the dressing room, carrying the spare point shoes, and found Faith still standing in the corridor. She had not moved. She was watching the doorway to the ballroom like a soldier watching a border she was not permitted to cross. "These are for you." Victor held out the new shoes. Faith looked at them, then at her mother's shoes on her feet. "I will wear hers." Victor studied her face. Then he nodded once. He understood. Those shoes were not equipment. They were inheritance. "I want you back on that stage," he said. "Not for Hollowell, not for adoption, not for any person in that room." He paused. "For your mother." Faith's jaw tightened. "Why are you doing this?" Victor did not answer directly. He looked at the worn point shoes on her feet, the cracked toe box, the fraying ribbons, the satin that had gone from pink to gray, and said, "Because I owe a debt that is 30 years overdue." Faith did not understand, but she saw his eyes, the eyes of a man carrying something too heavy for too long, and she believed him. They walked toward the stage together. Garrett Hollowell was midway through introducing Victor's solo when his assistant appeared at his elbow and whispered the change. Garrett's smile vanished. He grabbed the assistant's arm hard enough to wrinkle the sleeve. "He wants to do what?" "An evaluation. On stage. The girl from before." "Absolutely not. I am not turning my gala into a circus for some Mr. Ellsworth said you can watch or you can leave." Garrett's face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds. White, pink, red. He released the assistant's arm and straightened his jacket. 300 guests were watching. Cameras were rolling. He could not make a scene. And then Garrett's mind did what Garrett's mind always did. It calculated. If the girl failed publicly, he would look magnanimous for giving her a chance. If she somehow succeeded, he would take credit for discovering her. Either way, the story ended with his name on top. "Fine," he hissed. 2 minutes. If she embarrasses this event, Ellsworth is finished. He returned to the microphone with his smile rebuilt. Ladies and gentlemen, a special addition to tonight's program. Our esteemed ballet master, Victor Ellsworth, has requested a brief artistic evaluation, a live demonstration of raw, undiscovered talent. Let us see what our young Faith can do. His tone made it clear what he expected. Entertainment. A brief, awkward failure that would make the champagne taste even better. Faith stepped onto the stage for the second time that night. Same gray dress, same canvas bag, same worn point shoes. But something was different. Her shoulders were pulled back. Her chin was lifted, not high enough to look arrogant, but high enough to look like she had stopped apologizing. The ballroom murmured. Constance Davenport leaned forward with her phone already recording. "Round 2, she whispered to her husband. "This should be quick." Nora Beckett, a journalist seated near the press table, turned on her camera. She was not recording for entertainment. Something in her gut told her to pay attention. Victor walked to center stage. He did not introduce himself, did not smile, did not explain. He stood 5 feet from Faith, looked directly into her eyes, and said one word. "Tendu." Faith extended her right foot forward, toe brushing the marble. Clean, precise. "Dégagé." Sharp, off the floor. Controlled return. "Rond de jambe." Smooth arc, perfect circle traced by the toe, not a millimeter of hesitation. Victor began calling faster. "Frappé, fondu, grand battement." These were professional-level bar exercises, the kind that required years of academy training, and he was calling them without a bar. No support, pure balance, pure strength. Faith executed every one. Her body responded to each command the way a concert piano responds to a master's fingers, instantly, cleanly, without negotiation. The laughter in the ballroom died. Not all at once. It bled out slowly, table by table, as 300 pairs of eyes began to register what they were seeing. This was not a shelter girl pretending. This was technique. Garrett uncrossed his legs, his smile thinned. Victor called the final exercise in the sequence. Cambray back. Faith arched her spine backward, deep, slow, impossibly controlled, her arms floating above her like water rising. She held the full extension for 3 seconds. Then she returned to vertical without using her hands, without a single visible effort. Victor's expression did not change, but his right hand, the hand that had dismissed 10,000 imperfect dancers over 40 years, closed slowly into a fist at his side. Not anger, recognition. He had given Faith a professional-level examination. She had not merely passed. She had made it look like breathing. Garrett stood at the edge of the stage, arms folded, jaw tight. He felt the room tilting. 300 people who had been laughing 5 minutes ago were now staring at the orphan girl with something he had never seen directed at anyone but himself in this ballroom. Attention. He stepped forward and reached for the microphone. "Well, that was a lovely little warm-up, but I think we should move on to our featured—" Victor raised one hand, palm out, without turning around. The gesture was small, quiet, absolute. A ballet master silencing a billionaire with 5 fingers and 0 words. Garrett froze. His mouth was still open. 300 people saw it. The richest man in the room stopped mid-sentence by a single raised hand. He stepped back. His jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped beneath his skin. Victor lowered his hand and turned to Faith. His voice carried across the silent ballroom like the first note of an orchestra. "Now, show me what your mother really taught you." The orchestra conductor looked at Victor. Victor gave a single nod. The first notes of Adagio from Swan Lake floated across the ballroom like smoke rising from still water. Faith closed her eyes, inhaled once through her nose. Then she began to dance. She did not perform the standard Petipa choreography taught in every academy from Moscow to Manhattan. The classical foundation was there, every line correct, every position clean, but layered on top was something that belonged to no school. Subtle undulations rolled through her ribcage, her shoulders isolated in micro-movements no European tradition had ever codified. Her arms did not merely frame her body, they shifted between classical port-de-bras and something older. Drawn from a vocabulary Lorraine Turner had built alone in a Harlem studio while the world looked the other way. It was ballet. It was not ballet. It was both. The ballroom went silent. Not quiet, silent. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Constance Davenport's phone hand dropped to her lap. She was no longer recording for entertainment. She could not help watching. Eleanor Whitfield reached for her husband Thomas's hand under the tablecloth. Her eyes filled without her knowing why. Then Victor saw it. Faith transitioned into arabesques, long, sustained, melting one into the next. At the end of every arabesque, her wrist turned inward, pinky curled. Weight shifted half a beat early. The system. Victor clasped his hands behind his back to hide the trembling. 30 years ago, he watched Lorraine Turner create that system during a 4-minute audition. He had spent 3 decades trying to understand how a self-taught girl from Harlem arrived at a movement language simultaneously classical and revolutionary. He never figured it out. Because it was not intellectual. It lived in the body, and the only body that carried it had died 9 years ago, or so he believed. Now Faith's wrists told him the truth. Lorraine had not let it die. She poured it into her daughter day by day for 4 years. Faith kept it alive 9 more years alone in the dark. 13 years that system survived poverty, death, and silence. Faith was not copying her mother. She was continuing her. Victor whispered words no microphone caught. 30 years. I failed her mother. I will not fail her. The music built. Faith launched into grand jeté, legs splitting 180 degrees mid-air, hanging a fraction of a second longer than physics allowed. She landed without sound. Victor raised his hand. The orchestra stopped. Silence crashed into the room. He looked at Faith. His voice was steady but thin. 32 fouettes. Your mother could do them on a wooden floor in Harlem with no mirror and no music. Can you? Something shifted in Faith's face. This man had said, "Your mother," and for the first time tonight, those words carried respect. She nodded once, standing legs set, releve on left point. Lorraine's worn shoe on cold marble, 5 times more slippery than any practice floor, in shoes with no grip left. Faith began to turn. 1, 2, 3, spotting clean. 10, 15, no wobble. 20, the audience counted under their breath. 25, someone at table 4 stood without realizing. 30, 31, 32, 5th position. Perfect frame, not a tremor. 3 seconds of silence. Then, Nora Beckett's camera found the shoes. The left point had split at the toe during the final turn. Through the crack, in fading black ink, 5 words showed on the inner lining. Dance with your spine, LT. Nora photographed it. She did not know who LT was. That photograph would change everything. What 300 people did not yet understand, what they were about to learn, was that the ballet master gripping his own hands behind his back had met LT before. And what held his hands together was not admiration. It was shame. Garrett Hollowell was losing his own evening, and he knew it. He stepped onto the stage while the last echo of applause still hung in the air. His smile was back, wider now, harder at the edges, the kind of smile a man wears when control is slipping and the only tool left is volume. Wonderful. Truly wonderful. He clapped slowly into the microphone. Let us give our little orphan a round of applause. Spinning is very impressive for a street performer. He paused, letting the word street settle into the silence like a stone dropped into still water. But folks, real ballet, the kind you pay to see, the kind Victor Ellsworth has spent a lifetime mastering, is something else entirely. He turned to Victor. Victor, perhaps now you could show us the difference. The dying swan, as we planned. The message was clear. Perform your solo. Drown the girl's moment. Remind everyone who the real artist is. 300 faces turned to Victor. Victor Ellsworth stood at the center of the stage. He looked at Garrett, then at Faith, standing near the wing, her chest still rising from the fouettes, Lorraine's shoes dark with moisture against the marble. Then Victor did something that Garrett Hollowell had not calculated, something that no amount of money could have predicted or purchased or prevented. He turned to Faith and said, "Miss Turner, would you do me the honor of a pas de deux?" The ballroom inhaled. Pas de deux, the most intimate form in ballet, two dancers moving as a single body, traditionally reserved for principal artists at the highest level of the profession. Victor Ellsworth had not performed a pas de deux with anyone below the rank of principal dancer in 25 years. He was asking a 17-year-old orphan in worn shoes to dance beside him on equal footing, in front of everyone. Garrett's face went white, then red. He grabbed Victor's arm backstage of the microphone's range. "This is not what I paid for. End this now." Victor removed Garrett's hand from his sleeve, the way a person removes a piece of lint, gently, without looking at it. "You paid for a performance, Mr. Hollowell. You are about to get the performance of your life." Garrett opened his mouth, closed it. 300 guests were watching. He could not drag a ballet master off his own stage without looking like exactly what he was. He stepped back into the shadows. His jaw was locked so tight the tendons showed through the skin of his neck. Victor turned to the orchestra conductor and spoke one word: "Giselle." The conductor understood. He raised his baton. The first notes of Adagio from Giselle, Act 2, filled the ballroom. Slow, aching, built on a story everyone in ballet knows by heart. Giselle, the peasant girl betrayed by aristocracy. The girl who dies of heartbreak, but whose love is so powerful it survives death itself. Victor had chosen this music on purpose. He extended his hand to Faith. She looked at it, at the palm open and steady, at the fingers that had trained thousands of dancers and dismissed hundreds and remembered only 3. She took his hand. Her grip was light. Her bones were small inside his palm, but her balance was absolute. They began. Promenade en attitude. Victor held Faith's hand as she rose onto full point and turned slowly, her working leg extended behind her at 90 degrees. The rotation was seamless, not mechanical, not forced, like a compass needle finding north. 300 people watched a 63-year-old master and a 17-year-old orphan move as though they had rehearsed for months. They had never rehearsed. Not once. Not 1 minute. Faith read Victor's body the way she read music, instinctively, half a beat ahead, anticipating where his weight would go before it went there. And Victor, who had partnered with the finest ballerinas of 3 generations, felt something he had not felt in decades. He was not leading. She was. Supported Adagio. Victor lifted Faith into a fish dive, her body arching backward toward the floor, spine curved like a drawn bow, arms trailing above her like water falling upward. He held her 3 inches from the marble. The audience saw her hair nearly brush the stone. Then he raised her back to vertical in one fluid motion. No strain, no shake, as if gravity had taken the night off. Eleanor Whitfield was crying openly now. She did not wipe her eyes. Thomas held her hand with both of his. The music shifted. The coda began. Faster, urgent, demanding explosive technique. Faith responded. Grand jeté across the full width of the stage, legs splitting in the air, each jump higher than the last. She covered the distance in 4 leaps that made the audience gasp on every landing. Victor matched her energy with tours en l'air and cabrioles that defied his 63 years. He was not performing for Garrett anymore. He was not performing for the audience. He was dancing with the ghost of a woman he had failed, alive inside her daughter's body. Then it happened. Faith launched into a grand pas de chat through Victor's arms, a move seen only at Bolshoi-level performances, requiring absolute synchronization between two dancers. She passed through the space between his hands with her legs folded beneath her, arms overhead, back arched, clearing his frame by less than 2 inches. They had never rehearsed this. It should not have worked. But Faith was dancing choreography she knew by heart, choreography her mother had taught her in a Harlem apartment. And Victor recognized it. Every step, every transition, every breath mark. This was the variation he had composed 30 years ago for Lorraine Turner's audition. The piece he never published. The piece only Lorraine had ever seen. She had taught it to her daughter before she died. Victor's vision blurred. His left foot landed a fraction off center. Not enough for the audience to notice, but enough for Faith to feel through his hand. She adjusted her own balance to compensate. Instinct. Muscle memory. The same way Lorraine used to adjust when her partner faltered during practice. The music reached its final crescendo. Victor and Faith hit the closing position together, his arm extended, her body suspended in a penché that seemed to defy every physical law. The last note faded. Silence. 3 full seconds. Long enough to hear the chandeliers humming above. Then Victor Ellsworth did something that no one in that ballroom would ever forget. He released Faith's hand. He stepped back 1 pace. And slowly, so slowly that every pair of eyes in the room tracked the movement, he lowered himself onto 1 knee. His right hand pressed flat against his chest. His head bowed. Reverence. The highest honor in ballet. The gesture of absolute respect from master to artist. In the entire recorded history of classical ballet, the number of times a ballet master has knelt before a student could be counted on 1 hand. Victor spoke. The microphone caught every word. I once turned away the most gifted dancer I had ever seen. I turned her away because the world told me she did not belong. Because a board of men in gray suits decided that her skin was not the right image for their academy. His voice cracked on the word image, but he kept going. Her name was Lorraine Turner. She was your mother, and I have spent 30 years carrying the shame of my silence. He looked up at Faith. His eyes were wet. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper that the microphone still caught. I cannot give your mother back the career that was stolen from her. But I kneel before her art tonight because it did not die. You kept it alive, and it is the most extraordinary thing I have witnessed in 40 years. Faith stood above him. For the first time that night, the first time in 9 years, tears came. Not the tears of humiliation, not the tears of a girl begging to be chosen. The tears of a daughter hearing her dead mother's name spoken with reverence on a stage that Lorraine Turner was never allowed to stand on. Faith knelt down to Victor's level. She took his hand, and she said 5 words that would be replayed 30 million times in the weeks to come. She forgave you a long time ago. Victor's composure broke. A single sound escaped him. Not a word, just a breath that carried 30 years of weight. Faith continued, her voice clear and steady. She told me ballet is not about who lets you in. It is about what you leave behind. 3 seconds of silence. Then a chair scraped. 1 person stood. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. Then every single person in that ballroom was on their feet. Standing ovation. 300 people. The sound hit the chandeliers and came back down like thunder. Garrett Hollowell stood at the edge of the stage. His face was gray. His hands hung at his sides. He understood with perfect, terrible clarity that the evening, his gala, his name, his empire of charity and cameras and tax deductions, no longer belonged to him. Every camera in the room was pointed at a 17-year-old black orphan in worn shoes and a 63-year-old man on his knees. Nora Beckett's camera caught Garrett's face in that moment. Mouth open, eyes empty, the expression of a man watching his own relevance leave the room. She kept the camera on him for 6 full seconds. That footage would matter later. Then a voice cut through the ovation. Nora Beckett, microphone in hand, standing 3 rows from the stage. "Mr. Hollowell, 20 minutes ago you told this girl to dance for adoption. You told her that her mother had nothing worth passing down. Would you care to comment on that for our viewers?" Garrett opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The live stream captured every second. If this moment moved you, if you felt something watching a girl in borrowed shoes make a ballet master bow, share this story. Drop a comment. Tell me what you would have said to Garrett Hollowell if you had been standing in that room. Because this story is not over yet. And what happened to Garrett next was worse than anything that stage could hold. The ovation lasted 4 full minutes. Faith stood at center stage, with Victor still on one knee beside her. She did not bow. She did not wave. She held her mother's worn point shoes against her chest and let the sound wash over her like rain after a drought. When the applause faded, Victor rose and walked Faith to the backstage corridor, the same hallway where he had found her dancing alone 30 minutes earlier. Same hardwood, same dim light, but everything had changed. Victor spoke first. No authority, no performance, just a man confessing. 30 years ago, your mother auditioned for my academy. She was 19. She danced for 4 minutes. I saw something I had never seen before and have not seen since, until tonight. Faith listened without interrupting. The funding board refused her. They said she was not the right image. His jaw tightened. I knew they were wrong. I knew she was the most gifted dancer in the room, and I said nothing. I let her walk out. He looked at the worn shoes in Faith's hands. I cannot undo what I did to your mother, but I can make sure the world never does it to you. Victor removed a folded letter from his jacket. Cream stationery, the Royal Academy of Dance crest embossed at the top. Full scholarship, funded from his personal savings. No connection to Garrett Hollowell or any charity gala. A man paying a debt with everything he had left. Faith read the letter twice. Her fingers trembled on the paper. Then a voice came from behind them, soft, unsteady. I did not come here tonight to adopt a dancer. Eleanor Whitfield stood in the corridor doorway, Thomas beside her, eyes red, voice raw. I watched you stand on that stage alone and refuse to break. I do not want a performer. I want to be the family of the girl who held her mother's shoes and kept her spine straight. Faith looked at Eleanor, at Thomas, at Victor. 3 adults in a dim hallway offering 3 different things. A scholarship, a family, a confession. And not one of them had asked her to dance for it. For the first time in 9 years, Faith Turner was not auditioning. She was being chosen. The first clip hit the internet before the gala champagne went flat. A guest at table 6 had recorded Garrett's opening attack from the first word. Dance for adoption. 31 seconds of a billionaire mocking a 17-year-old black orphan on his own stage. The video reached 2 million views before midnight. By sunrise, it had crossed 12 million. By the following evening, 28 million people had watched Garrett Hollowell tell a motherless girl that she had nothing worth keeping. The second clip traveled even faster. Victor Ellsworth, ballet master, 40 years of career, trained by the Royal Academy, lowering himself onto one knee before a teenage girl in worn point shoes. The Bow, the internet called it. 20 million views in 48 hours, 35 million by the end of the week. The hashtag wrote itself. Hashtag Dance for Adoption. It trended in the United States for 3 consecutive days. Then it went global. But it was the photograph that broke everything open. Nora Beckett's close-up of the split point shoe, cracked satin, frayed ribbon, and 5 words in fading black ink visible through the tear. Dance with your spine. LT. That image was shared 4 million times in 72 hours. People printed it on t-shirts. Tattoo artists reported clients bringing it in as a reference. A muralist in Brooklyn painted it 30 feet tall on the side of a building on 125th Street, 3 blocks from the laundromat where Lorraine Turner once taught ballet for $8 an hour. Then the investigations began. Journalists pulled Garrett Hollowell's adoption records. What they found turned sympathy into fury. In the past 5 years, Garrett had publicly adopted 3 children at his annual gala, each time on camera, each time to thunderous applause. What the cameras never followed was the return. Every child had been sent back to St. Amelia's within 4 months. Quietly. Paperwork filed after midnight. No press releases. No follow-up story. Each adoption had generated significant tax deductions. Each return had generated nothing. Except a child who spent 4 months believing they had a family and then woke up one morning back in a bunk bed. The financial records confirmed the rest. Garrett's charitable foundation, A Child's Dream, had raised over $90 million in 6 years. Less than 11% reached any orphanage. The rest dissolved into administrative fees, consulting contracts paid to Garrett's own companies, and event costs that included private jets, hotel suites, and Victor Ellsworth's $150,000 performance fee. 2 of Garrett's largest corporate partners, the law firm Davenport & Cole and the investment bank Meridian Capital, severed their contracts within 72 hours. The board of A Child's Dream demanded Garrett's resignation. He gave a televised apology from behind a mahogany desk. His voice trembled in all the rehearsed places. Nobody believed a word. The New York State Office of Children and Family Services opened a formal investigation into adoption practices at events organized by Garrett's foundation. Garrett Hollowell did not go to prison. There was no criminal charge, not yet. But he lost something he valued more than freedom. He lost relevance. His name, once printed on buildings and ballroom invitations, now appeared only in headlines he could not control. Donors disappeared. Politicians stopped returning calls. The 14 Manhattan high-rises still stood, but the man who owned them had become someone people crossed the street to avoid. Brenda Hollins resigned as director of St. Amelia's. In her letter, she wrote one sentence that mattered. "I chose funding over a child, and I will carry that failure for the rest of my life." The children of St. Amelia's got a new director. They also got something Brenda had never given them. An honest answer when they asked why adults sometimes looked away. Faith Turner moved to London that autumn. She enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dance on a full scholarship funded by Victor Ellsworth's personal savings. Not a single dollar connected to any charity, any gala, or any billionaire's tax strategy. On her first day, she placed 2 pairs of shoes in her locker. The new pair, pristine, pink satin, perfectly fitted. And her mother's pair, gray, cracked, ribbons fraying, toe box split from 32 fouettes on a marble floor. She kept them side by side. Every morning before class, she touched the worn toe of the left shoe, where the ink had faded but the words still held. "Dance with your spine, not your feet." Victor became her mentor. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, out of the only currency that matters in ballet, respect for something greater than himself. He told a journalist 3 months later, "I have trained dancers on every continent for 40 years. Faith Turner is the finest I have ever seen, and her mother, Lorraine Turner, was the finest I ever let go." The Royal Academy carved a line into the stone above the entrance to its main rehearsal hall. 8 words, a name beneath them. "Dance with your spine, not your feet. Lorraine Turner." The first time Lorraine's name had ever appeared on any wall outside a Harlem apartment. Eleanor and Thomas Whitfield completed Faith's adoption through the legal process. No stage, no cameras, no applause. Just paperwork and a quiet courtroom, and a 17-year-old girl who finally had a last name someone chose on purpose. "Look, I picked this one because I am so done watching people decide what a black girl is allowed to dream. Her mom danced in a room above a laundromat, and nobody cared. But she taught her kid every single step before she died. You cannot kill that. You just cannot. If this story made you feel something, if you thought of someone who was told they were not enough, share this video with them. Sometimes a story is the only mirror that tells the truth. If you were in that ballroom tonight, what would you have said to Garrett? What would you have said to Faith? Tell me in the comments. Go back and watch the moment Victor first heard Faith's shoes on the hardwood floor. Watch his face. There is a detail I did not explain. See if you can find it. Subscribe and hit that bell. Next week I have another story about someone the world underestimated. Trust me, you will stand up from your chair.